this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 108 of the House of Commons Standing Committees on Veterans Affairs. Conformément à la...
Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on March 9th, 2023 and December 5th, 2023, the committee is resuming its study on recognizing Persian Gulf and wartime service veterans. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. I would like to remind all members of the committee to ask their questions through the chair.
I'd like to welcome, first of all, a few colleagues. We have with us Mr. Scott Davidson, who replaced Mr. Tolmie. Welcome. And as you can see, we have a new clerk, Mr. McClellan, Grant McClellan, for today's meeting. Thank you for helping us. And I would also like to welcome a group of students from age 13 to 18 who are with us today. They are from Canada Montessori, who are here to observe the work of the committee. So welcome. They are the Canada Montessori. So for the first hours, we have with us as individual, Mr. Sean Bruyere, retired. Yes, I'll come to you, Mr. Richards. He's a retired Captain, Air Force Intelligence Officer. And Mr. Christopher Banks, a surgeon, retired, and he used to be here as maybe every meeting that we have. And by video conference, we also have Michael Bloss. He's a lawyer, veteran, is from by video conference. So before we start, you're going to have 5 minutes for your opening statement, but I have a request on the Zoom from Mr. Blake Richards. Please, Mr. Richards, go ahead.
Yeah, Chair, on a point of order. This morning, I understand that you tabled the report on our recent study on the transition to civilian life. Our party had a dissenting report. I know that at least one other party had a supplemental report that they had submitted with that report. I was not given an opportunity or informed or made aware in any way that that report would be tabled this morning. That is the usual practice. Usually, if there are dissenting reports, the vice chairs or parties involved are informed. That, in my mind, is a breach of my privilege as a member of the committee in order to be able to table that in the report in the House when the report is tabled. So I'd just like to ask you, Chair, what happened? Why was I not informed? My understanding was the other party was also not informed. Can you explain why that happened? And can you indicate what you're going to do to correct that so that we will be given the opportunity that we are supposed to be given to present our dissenting and supplemental reports?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mr. Richards, I understand your point of view. And one of the things I have in mind, you know that we recently changed the clerk from one to another. And, well, they asked me when I will be available to table this report. And I said today. And I think that the email that they sent to the committee was a little bit late or something like that. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to check with the clerk and to see what we can do as a procedural thing that can offer to you a possibility to say that there is a dissenting report on that study. Is that okay? I also have Monsieur Luc Desilets qui voudrait intervenir. Monsieur Desilets.
Monsieur Desilets? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Even if the clerk is perhaps not aware, I would like to know what is going on with our motion that requested the presence of the defense minister at our committee. When that motion was adopted, the request was sent to the minister so that he testify as soon as possible. We stated that we had a limited number of meetings, but to my knowledge, we have not yet received a response to organize that meeting. They didn't acknowledge that they received the email. I am not sure. I was not advised of this, but our clerk is working to have the minister with us as soon as possible. Today is the last day of our study, and so I think that's quite unfortunate. I would like to think that the committee would allow us to extend the study to receive the minister for 1 hour. It's essential for our study. As you know, I am here to respect the wishes of the committee. And just a moment, before I go to Mr. Casey, I have Ms. Wagenthal. I just want to finish what I had to say. Mr. Tonmill is absent. His mother passed away. And I imagine on behalf of everyone here, we could send our sincerest condolences. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. We will do so. That is one of our colleagues who is not here today. And we wish him well in this difficult time. Ms. Wagenthal.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just before I make my comment, we are really pleased to have Mr. Davidson with us today. However, no one can truly replace Fraser Tomley.
Yeah.
And I know he's listening, so that's good.
Are you sure?
We can talk later. That being said, I just want to clarify. I just want to clarify. My understanding is that before you can table a report, you have to inform the committee. Is that correct? Like,
You would think so.
no harm meant to the new analyst, just to clarify.
So, as you know, I'm here for today's meeting, so I'm not up to date on all of the details of ACVA, but my understanding is that when the report was adopted, it was among the routine motions was instructing the chair to present the report to the House with no specified date associated with it. So there was guidance to do so. As to the details of what happened in this specific instance for the communications, as indicated, I don't know the answer there. Would need to look into.
Fair enough. So in other words, there isn't anything in your orders or expectations as chair that you will inform the committee before a report is tabled.
Yeah, wow.
Okay.
Yeah, but like I said, we're going to look to the House of Commons procedures, and if we can go back and table the report again with the
Urge them to do
dissenting
that.
report, so I
right.
will do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last intervention, a point of order, Mr. Sean Casey.
I'd actually like to speak to both points of order. So first of all, on the one raised by Mr. Richards, I agree with him, and I think that if Mr. Richards and if there was another dissenting report, if they were to rise in the House and seek to present their dissenting reports, that we should all do our best to secure the unanimous consent of each of our parties so that they be allowed to do so. So that if everyone can agree that we can write this by unanimous consent, you can do virtually anything by unanimous consent, and in my view, that shouldn't be very hard to obtain. I would do my part to ensure that nobody from our side said no. On the second one, le point de Monsieur Desilets,
I understand that the minister has been invited to testify. I will table a motion to extend the study. I won't be doing it on a point of order, but I do think that we will probably need 2 additional meetings with witnesses and 1 hour with the minister, and I will formally table this if needed. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Casey. We will be having a break week next week, and so if that is the will of committee members, right after we come back, after that break week, we could try to have the minister and other witnesses. If I understood correctly, before we move on to the witnesses, if I understood for Mr. Richards and Mr. Casey, would committee members accept a unanimous decision for the dissenting report to be tabled? Yes? Thank you. We will do what we must in order to solve this situation.
So now let's go to our witnesses, and you're going to have 5 minutes each for your opening statement, and after that, members of the committee will ask you questions, and we are here. This is the first panel, and for a total of 1 hour. So I would like to start with the retired captain, Mr. Bruyere, to start the meeting. Please, go ahead.
I sincerely thank committee members for taking up this study, a study that arguably should have been initiated before we went to war in 1990, or even in 1947, when the last of 1 million Canadians who served during World War II ended their active service. Why were 600,000 Canadian Forces members who followed not granted the same entitlements as war veterans when the risks of our active service have been real and tragic? I profoundly acknowledge Louise Richard, who began this fight for all of us post-war veterans. She co-founded the first Gulf War Veterans Organization, vigorously advocating with and mentoring me, while so many veterans suffered in silence. I thank Harold Davis and Mike McGlennon for pushing for this study. I sincerely appreciate VAC officials who worked diligently to provide the data that has, to my awareness, never been organized in the manner which I submitted to committee. Finally, I thank my son Wilfred, his classmates, and the staff at Canada Montessori for joining us in this remarkable opportunity 1 month before Remembrance Day. When a Canadian enters the military, we sign a contract to accept, unlike any other profession, including police and fire services, that we can be legally ordered into harm's way, potentially losing our lives. Many have tragically fulfilled their end of the contract. I lost my great-grandfather in World War I, my grandfather in World War II. Others, like number of veterans in this room, live a daily fulfillment of that contract with debilitating and often excruciating psychological and physical sacrifices for our nation. Government chose to change their end of the bargain while we still needed them to uphold the benefits in place at time of our enlistment. In 2005, Parliament was pressured by war veteran organizations to pass legislation ending a 200-year commitment to lifelong pensions for disabled veterans, spouses, and their children in favor of one-time lump sums that pay nothing for family members. Yet these organizations enshrine protections to keep their lifelong disability pensions. Let's be clear, there was no meaningful or widespread consultation in passing this law, and what little consultation done was ignored in the final product. This is not recognition in any sense of the word. This was about saving money, and what the architect of the program, Dara Mogan, stated was a $1 billion wellness dividend. In a sad trend, the 2019 Pension for Life changed the contract yet again, hidden in a budget omnibus bill which prevented committee studies. The parliamentary budget officers studied these 3 disability regimes. For the cohort of veterans, over their lifetime applying between 2019 and 2024, government would save $18 billion when compared to these veterans being covered under the Pension Act. Recognition of military service has 2 central components: commemoration and compensation. Missing either diminishes both. Recognition is the foundation of a debt owed by and the gratitude of a nation to those who serve in uniform. Recognition is the heart of valuing one's service to one's country. Entitlement in law is indispensable to recognition. Recognition requires reciprocal legal obligations. Certainly placing the Persian Gulf War on the cenotaph is a no-brainer. However, officially labeling us war veterans may not be accompanied by the entitlement some assume. Granting us World War II veteran benefits would be of little help now, except for the life insurance for the disabled and replacing pain and suffering compensation with a disability pension. What futures would we have lived had we been granted updated World War II benefits? Education, business, startup assistance, land, home building, life insurance, and low-cost mortgages, along with public awareness of our sacrifice. How many suicides could have been prevented? How many families saved? And how many fruitful second careers would have blossomed? What is the personal and family cost of losing so much opportunity and productivity? How much money government could have earned in taxes from these dynamic futures instead of fighting to pay billions in much-needed disability benefits? What compensation would be appropriate for our lost opportunities? When we serve, we have the duty to give everything, including our lives. Government doesn't even have the duty to inform us of the benefits to which we're entitled, let alone a duty to care for us. I hope committee takes up the issue of a duty to inform veterans and their families. Our obligations to government are limitless. Government's obligations to us are non-existent or whimsical at best and decorated with far too much well-meaning but ultimately empty rhetoric. But an official apology would be a strong first step. Initiating further original and comprehensive cross-section and longitudinal studies of veterans applying the insurance principle to all military service include the mandate to care for veterans' children in the Veterans Wellbeing Act, implementing a reverse onus on disability claims, and taking our rehabilitation out of the hands of for-profit contractors would be a good second step. Belief in the cause of our sacrifice is central to our identity, our rehabilitation, and our integration into society after military service. The world, morality, and regimes may change. What cannot change is our belief that the government system and rights for which we gave so much truly, meaningfully, and substantially values our sacrifice with more than words. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brouillet. And now let's go to Mr. Christopher Banks for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Banks.
Thank you for welcoming me to testify once again. For the record, my name is Christopher Banks, and I served as a sergeant after 20 years. I retired as a sergeant after 20 years in the Canadian Army. I joined in 2000, and by 2003, I was deployed to Camp Maple Leaf in Bosnia, and I served as a peacekeeper. In 2008, I was deployed to FOB Wilson in Kandahar, where we engaged insurgents and dodged IEDs. I returned home with post-traumatic stress disorder, and in 2019, I was medically released. Since then, I have studied public policy and administration at the University of Guelph, as well as defense and security at Algonquin College. I am a stakeholder with National Defense, a stakeholder with Veterans Affairs. I am a member of the Royal Canadian Military Institute's Defense and Security Study Committee, and I write for the Defense Policy Journal, SITREP. I joined in an era of transformation and was able to witness a transformation from a Cold War military into the modern military. After 9/11, the military changed as it adapted to the change in warfare in Afghanistan and as it shook off the cobwebs of administering a fighting war. It continued a long process of change from a uni-capable military to a more capable and dynamic military. Not only did the military change as a result of combat operations, but the military changed socially, as did Canadian society. Social standards, training standards, and even terminology changed considerably in this time. They say the only constant in life is change, and the military is no exception. Since my return from Afghanistan, I have sought to help my fellow veterans as an advocate. I advocate in two ways. Firstly, I help veterans by helping them connect to the resources they need, whether by engaging directly with them or by speaking to veteran groups about my journey and the importance of self-care. Secondly, I bring my experience and knowledge to the change makers by engaging with legislators and policymakers on behalf of all veterans and serving military. On the matter at hand, I want to be clear, I am not a Persian Gulf veteran. I was asked to testify because I am a combat veteran, or as is being described by some in these meetings, a war service veteran. I have followed the previous meetings on this subject and have concluded at the heart of what they are asking for is the same hurt and irritation all of Canada's veterans feel. The erosion of benefits over time is no stranger to anyone who has donned a uniform, nor is the dragging of feet for projects that don't secure a re-election. This is the reality for Canada's veterans and serving military. Those who have worn the uniform know all too well the feeling of being taken for granted. Commemoration and recognition is important to all veterans, and we Afghan veterans have our own demands. The monument, which has become politicized, the Victoria Cross that was denied to Jess Lorchelle, the combat action badge that is teased every couple of years. And veterans of all demographics demand reversing the erosion of benefits and services, the follow-up study for the PCVRS contract, ensuring benefits are easy to access and in line with the ever-increasing cost of living, and hiring more case managers and adjudicators at Veterans Affairs to eliminate the devastating wait times. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banks. And now I'm from the Canadian-Afghanistan War Veterans Association. I invite Mr. Michael Blois by video conference for 5 minutes. À vous, Monsieur Blois.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the committee for providing me with this opportunity to speak to you this morning. My name is Mike Blois, and I served in the Canadian Forces from 2000 until 2011. I joined the Army at the age of 17 and wanted to do nothing else with my life but serve my country and fight for it. I served in the Royal Canadian Regiment, and I'm immensely proud of the accomplishments my regiment and my fellow Royals completed during my time in the military. I was wounded in Afghanistan on January 29th, 2007. This ushered in the end of my military career. Much to my displeasure, I was medically released in 2011. I then went to law school and have become a partner at Diamond & Diamond Lawyers LLP, where I'm fortunate to use my experience to help injured people put their lives back together after being injured. I'm also afforded the opportunity with my law firm and my partners to help other veterans on pro bono basis with their appeals to Veterans Affairs or other legal matters. We also put them in touch with other legal experts if their needs are outside of our scope of practice. As you're all aware, 20,000+ Canadians fought in the war in Afghanistan, all of whom would refer to each other as combat veterans. As such, the designation from special duty area to wartime service, outside of any implications that may come from benefits, and I think the first witness, I think, outlined it quite well, that there's probably very, very limited, if any, and any changes that will come in the benefits is nothing but a semantic change, but fails to address the real issues faced by Afghan veterans today, which, again, I think the second witness did a great job of outlining what those are. The Prime Minister of this country, prior to being elected as a Prime Minister, stated that no veteran should have to sue the government for benefits that they're entitled to. But that's had to happen many times, and many times since he's become Prime Minister. In my capacity as a lawyer, I've represented a class of Afghan veterans suing Veterans Affairs Canada and the government for failing to meet their own policies and timeframes. The wait times that veterans suffer Afghan veterans suffer while waiting to get benefits is unacceptable, and nothing seems to change. In this lawsuit, we were successful in obtaining certification and are now in the appeals process. Afghan veterans have fought the most recent war in our nation's history and unfortunately have to continue to fight for the benefits that we're entitled to from the government that sent us to that war. So coming before you today to discuss changes that should have been done at the outset of a war, and as, I'm going to mispronounce your name, but Sean stated at the beginning, probably should have happened as far back as into the 1940s, and all of the problems that have flown from there, is nothing but fluff on the outside of the real issues that veterans and Afghan veterans are facing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to start the first round of questions of 6 minutes each. And I invite is by video conference Mr. Blake Richards to start that round. Please, Mr. Richards.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you to each of you for your service to our country and for your testimony today. I'll start with you, Mr. Bloy. There's a lot of issues that veterans deal with when it comes to the bureaucratic nightmare that's Veterans Affairs. The government often downplays those issues. They say that they're trying really hard and that they're complicated. But even if we give some leeway and say that, in fact, some of these issues are complicated, there still are a lot of friction points that veterans deal with when dealing with Veterans Affairs. There's still a lot of delays. There is a lot of issues. And I guess aside from that, we also have, it seems like there's this inability for them to be able to get just the simple things right. Things like commemoration, things like recognition. You know, all three of you mentioned these things a little bit in your opening statements. Sir, for you as an Afghan veteran, this monument situation that just seems to never get resolved. When they get these commemoration and these recognition and these respect, frankly, respect is the most important part. When they get those pieces wrong and when they miss them, how does that make you feel as a veteran?
I mean, not trying to overstate it, but it is like a knife in the heart. When you join with that understanding that, you know, you're signing up and that, you know, you can put your life on the line. And there is at least a belief in the tacit understanding that the government will be there for you for the same thing. And commemoration should be the easiest thing that we do. And as Sean said, you know, putting Afghanistan on cenotaphs is a no-brainer. Getting a monument for a war that is in our recent collective memory, where the average veteran ranges from the late 30s to the early 60s, should be a no-brainer. And should be done. So when these things aren't done, it feels like somebody is at best ignorant of how you feel, and at worst indifferent to what went on and what we did. The horrors of war and the impacts of war don't change from generation to generation. Watching somebody die in front of you or having to take a life doesn't change, and the impact of that doesn't change. So the commemoration shouldn't be any different, and it should be done easily. So when it's not, it hurts twice as much.
Yeah, you've said it very eloquently, and it's a disgrace, in my opinion, that we're in that situation. Now, on top of that, getting services, getting benefits, getting claims dealt with is a challenge. That's the other aspect. That's, as Mr. Bruya said in his opening remarks, the two sides of this, and it seems like we got a government getting them both wrong. You mentioned in your opening remarks about being involved in this class action lawsuit that's currently being dealt with. I wanted to ask you a couple things. First of all, you know, how does it make you feel when, as a veteran, you are now working with other veterans and having to represent other veterans, with the government opposing you in court rather than trying to find a way to help? I know you've tried all the other avenues to raise these concerns outside of court before going there. How does it make you feel when you have to actually go to court because you can't get the assistance for veterans that they need without having to do so?
I mean, it feels like that the Shakespearean quote one more time into the breach, dear friends, is kind of the way it feels. It feels like we're going back to war and back into battle. And instead of fighting a foreign entity, we're fighting the government. And in a way, during those arguments in court, I'm glad as sad as it is, I'm glad that no other veterans came to witness, because if they had to hear the arguments of the government, it would have been enraging for them, because the delay in benefits is a joke. It's astonishing that veterans have to wait 50 weeks, 60 weeks when the government sets a timetable for veterans and says this is the time frame when you complete your application. 16 weeks, we'll give you a decision, and veterans are okay with that. They get that there's going to be that it takes time, but when you set the goalposts, meet them, or at least get close, and they're not even doing that. So it's very disheartening. I mean, the reason I became a lawyer, I never wanted to be a lawyer my whole life. I wanted to be in the infantry my whole life. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I became a lawyer because I wanted to do what I'm doing, and that's this class action lawsuit was the motivating factor for me, because I knew that the government wasn't going to change their tune or wasn't going to do anything, despite us trying our best to get them to, and we had to take them to court, and they're continuing to fight us tooth and nail every step of the way.
I guess I hear that, and I think that, thankfully people like you are out there that are ready to fight, and you went and became a lawyer to do it. But the fact that you had to, the fact that you felt that it was necessary, just makes me sad. It makes me absolutely sad. And I guess I'll just offer you the opportunity, if there's anything else you'd like to tell us about the lawsuit, the basis behind the lawsuit, the idea that people are waiting 50 or 60 weeks, like, that's ridiculous. Is there any other comment you wanted to make on the lawsuit?
Yes. Mr. Burrs, you only have 15 seconds left to respond to that.
The math used by the government to calculate their ability to meet their deadlines is, if the Canadian population could hear what they said, they would be disgusted. They only meet it in 46% of the cases, but they ignore 20% of the most complex cases, but they don't know which cases that are in the application process are in that 20%. So their 46% of meeting the deadline is a complete fiction. And they have no idea how many people meet that deadline.
Thank you so much. And now let's go to Mr. Randip Sarai for 6 minutes, please. Mr. Sarai.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. And I want to welcome the class that's here from Canada. Welcome here. I'll go to you, Mr. Bria. You brought a group of students with you to watch the testimony here and in our committee meeting today. I think a key aspect of commemoration is ensuring young people and students have the opportunity is to learn about Canadian history and the veterans who have served Canada in the past and all the way up to this day. Would you agree with that statement? And as a follow-up, do you have thoughts on other ways to encourage commemoration opportunities or learning materials that can help in this regard?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Sarai. I think that's a bigger question than maybe I would originally have anticipated. So, for instance, if we look at, I'm very grateful the students are here. One of the differences between World War II that we've heard in some testimony and current operations is the aspect of knowledge of the public around them. This provides a degree of social support that people can validate that service. They can understand the struggles that people are going through, because many families were dealing with veterans that were suffering at the time. And we know from research that lack of social support is one of the number one predictors that people will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So this has very real and tangible damage when we don't socially support our veterans. I think also is that research is starting to show that when people develop PTSD, they fail to seek out social support for obvious reasons: isolation, fear, anxiety, super low self-esteem. So it's a vicious circle that really needs to be interrupted at a national level. Not just, for once a year, but an awareness that all Canadians have to understand what's being sacrificed on their behalf. That's why I submitted the table to committee that was developed in hand with Veterans Affairs to show that the cost of war is more than just the official statistics of deceased in theater or wounded in theater. We're talking about casualties that develop years later, and they are casualties of war that are not reported. And I think the public needs to learn about that. And I think getting the students involved at this level of democracy also helps them to participate and understand that we all have a right to speak our mind and we all have a right to bring our issues forward. I would also say that one of the components, if you don't mind me adding one more thing, which is we put enormous efforts into bringing a Canadian citizen into the military and training them not just physically to do the tasks, but training them mentally. It is the most powerful, legally sanctioned indoctrination that's allowed in our nation. And yet we expect that those veterans, when they finish their term of service, most of them finish before 20 years, they have a second career ahead of them, they are severely handicapped because they have not been de-indoctrinated. We go to boot camp to indoctrinate them. They spend years, we've spent years in our careers, thinking like the military. The civilian world doesn't work that way. To succeed in the civilian world amongst the social support that we need a comprehensive program to de-indoctrinate them, to make them feel. Community leaders can join in this, business leaders, where we have a boot camp for de-indoctrination, make them feel welcome over, maybe it could be run on weekends, maybe it could be run, full time, but a system which allows these veterans to feel that they belong to the nation for which they sacrificed.
Thank you. And Mr. Banks, would you like to add?
I would say that the military is probably the most complex beast in the federal government, if not all of Canada. As a culture, we're vastly different than pretty much every other culture in Canada. We're the only one that's geared towards lethality. So on that note alone, we are very cryptic, very hard to read to outsiders. And while I can acknowledge that the government does a lot of good work on offering up commemoration around Remembrance Day, like the materials that the schools will get for educational purposes, it's limited to Remembrance Season and Veterans Week. And when Veterans Week exists every single day of the year.
Thank you, and rightly so. And Mr. Bloy, if you want to add.
I think when it comes to, I think Sean had some really great points there. I think when it comes to the mental component of being in the military, is that the conditioning that is put onto soldiers to meet deadlines, meet obligations, meet you're going to be on the line of departure at this time and you're going to go here and you're going to do that. These were orders I received in Afghanistan, and it was, you're going to get to this line, you're going to move from this location to this location, and you're going to kill the enemy in between there. And there's no exception. There's no minute off. You're there. And when you get that level of expectation put onto you, you then, veterans naturally assume that those putting those expectations on them are going to hold themselves to the same standard. And we know that they don't even come close.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Serai. And I would like to welcome one of our colleagues, Mr. Dan Muse, to the committee. Et maintenant, je passe donc la parole à Monsieur Luc.
I will now give the floor to Mr. Luc Desilets for the next 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the students that we have with us. I used to be a principal, and so I'm very happy to see young people participating in this meeting. Mr. Bruya, you talked about data. You shared a number earlier, and it's the first time that I've heard a number that allows us to quantify adjustments. You talked about $18 billion, correct?
Correct.
Oui. Okay.
Can you tell us where that number comes from? Who did this study?
Thank you. So the Parliamentary Budget Officer, I do not know at whose behest, in 2019 when the pension for life was announced, decided to compare the regimes of benefits 2006, which was under the Pension Act, post 2006 to 2019 up to the Pension for Life, which was called the New Veterans Charter, and then the Pension for Life afterwards. Those three cohorts, he looked at the veterans that were anticipated to apply for benefits between 2019 and 2024. He then did the costing, principally focused upon the disability, the pain and suffering compensation, because the income loss is the same for all veterans. The veterans that came before 2006 are on the income loss program as they are after 2000, up till 2019 and afterwards. So they would all have received benefits from improvements to income loss. What the big difference was, we're talking about apples and oranges, income loss versus pain and suffering payments. The courts recognize that distinction. So focusing on the pain and suffering payments, he looked at that cohort of veterans, and over their lifetime, that he found that were they to be paid under the Pension Act, it would cost around $50 billion for that cohort to pay for their benefits. However, under the 2006 program, if I'm not mistaken, here, that he anticipated that the present clients, so that was both present clients and future cohort, that it would be $50 billion. Under scenario 2, which was the new Veterans Charter or Veterans Wellbeing Act, it would be $29 billion. And for Pension for Life would be $32 billion. So that's an $18 billion differential between Pension for Life and if they were covered under Pension Act payments. And it's quite significant.
Et la conclusion que...
And this is quite a significant amount. Is that why there's not equity between the different regimes?
That's the number one reason why there's not equity. I mean, we have other issues such as the recognition component, the social support component, the reestablishment benefits after World War II. But in terms of that number, that's a lightning rod. It was a lightning rod since the lump sum was first created in 2006, that it is the pain and suffering component. And if I could just read the words of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, from the perspective of the veteran, virtually all clients would be better off if they were to receive the benefits under the Pension Act. And what was most notable about the transition from the Veterans Wellbeing to the Pension for Life, it's still called the Veterans Wellbeing Act, but in that 2019 stage, they eliminated new applicants from receiving the Critical Impairment Allowance Supplement. Now, only 200 veterans receive that right now because new applicants were prevented from applying. But this is the allowance that goes to the most disabled. So the most disabled veterans were going to be less well off under the Pension for Life to the tune of $300,000 over their lifetime each.
Malheureusement, intéressant.
That's interesting. Did you have any physical issues or psychological issues after leaving the Army?
Yes, I did. Now, quite importantly, during the 1990s, it was called a dark decade for a reason. I remember returning from the Gulf War. I was sent back early due to combat stress reaction. And I showed up in front of the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said to me, "By the way, everything that you say to me, I will report to your commanding officer." So being an astute little young ambitious officer, I kept my mouth shut. And he put a diagnosis of jet lag. I kept that diagnosis of jet lag for many years until I realized I truly had PTSD, but not till after I was released. And I wasn't medically released because as I sat with the medical doctor with over 13 physical and psychological ailments on my release medical, he came in jokingly and says, "Is that all? You're good to go." That was my support when I left the military.
Merci de répondre aussi franchement.
Thank you for responding so honestly. In your view, if you're deployed to Afghanistan, the Gulf War, should there be nuances, or should we say simply that war is war?
In fact, I would agree with you 100%. The war is war. I think trying to create different regimes for different periods of conflict just creates confusion with the public. It creates great animosity between veterans, and those sort of distinctions should not exist. We can maybe distinguish between combat and non-combat, but I would think that would be the degree of distinction.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Monsieur Desilets.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. We are now going to move back to Zoom.
Miss Rachel Blaney, it's your turn for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. And I want to thank all of our witnesses, first of all, for your service to the country and for your testimony here today. And of course, I as well want to say hello and welcome to all the students. I know Wilfred's out there, and just to let you know, your dad said really good things about you. So my question, I'm going to start with Mr. Brouillet. I really appreciate your testimony and found quite horrifying to hear that you were diagnosed with jet lag. I'm going to probably never forget that for the rest of my life. So thank you for sharing that. But I just want to get one thing clear. Have you sent to the committee the report that you were citing earlier? I just want to make sure that that's been sent to the committee.
The Parliamentary Budget Officer report, Ms. Blaney? Yeah.
Yes.
I will make sure they get it, but I have not sent it.
Okay, if you could do that, I just want to make sure that that information can be included in the report. You also talked about animosity between veterans, which I think is one of the challenges that we don't hear enough about. And it concerns me greatly because when you take on that role of service, you want people to feel like part of a team. That's part of what it is to serve in the military, and to have ways that people feel animosity, I think, is unfortunate. So I just want to get a little bit of clarity, because you talked about combat and non-combat. And I think that one of the challenges we're hearing really clearly in this study is that those categories are very important, and how they're being dealt with right now is harmful. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about why combat versus non-combat, and is that your recommendation that that be the change?
I appreciate the question, Ms. Blaney. I would just like to clarify, do I agree with the distinction? No, I would understand it. But if we take the precedent from World War II, what happened was in 1946, the Pension Act was changed so that people that originally were just merely stationed in Canada were covered under, if you remember, the compensation principle. There was such rancor and misunderstanding about what was going on that the government actually changed the Pension Act and said that all veterans who were stationed back home would be covered under the insurance principle. And so if we go to, for instance, 9/11, that under the infamous document 1147 that Veterans Affairs has about the insurance principle, they made it going forward, all veterans that were on training would be covered under the insurance principle, even during their downtime on weekends when they were training for an SDA. Well, the fact is that when we join the military, we're training for SDAs from the day we put on that uniform. I really think that there shouldn't be any distinction. I think that the benefits that are given for disability will compensate for that distinction. I think that when all of us are in the military, we're heavily indoctrinated and heavily disabled to retransition back into civilian life, no matter what our disabilities.
Thank you for that. So, I keep hearing about the differences between the Pension Act and the Wellbeing Act. I'm just wondering if you could explain that a little bit, and what are the economic losses, and what are your thoughts are on that? And I guess the last thing that I would ask is, when I'm listening to this, and thank you so many witnesses for trying to make this clear in my brain. This is a huge issue to wrap your head around, so I really appreciate the patience. But I'm wondering, is there a way, or should we do something where the Pension Act and the Veterans Wellbeing Act be harmonized so that people who serve together get the same benefits? Is that a solution that we could look at?
Certainly, and I think when we compare the benefits that all veterans from basically World War I right up until 2006 were covered under the Pension Act. Prior to that, there were other lifelong pensions in place. The important thing, I think, one aspect for a committee that cares about families, and spouses and children of the families, they were always compensated for separately under the Pension Act. 2006, that changed. And since then, it has not improved the situation. There are no extra monies for a married person or a person with dependents or a person with children. And so I think in order to harmonize the benefits, yes, we know what the costs will be, and Parliament would not be happy about approving that. But it's an easy fix if we ignore the money part. All we have to do is replace the pain and suffering compensation under the Veterans Wellbeing Act with the Pension Act. And there, it's done.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is so helpful. I just want to go to Mr. Banks really quickly. What could the government be doing to commemorate Persian Gulf and Afghan veterans? I think it's really important because what I hear again and again is this reality of feeling excluded. And so what do we need to do now with all of the tensions to take that next step?
Well, speaking briefly on Persian Gulf, because as I said, I'm not a Persian Gulf veteran. When I was doing some research before coming in today, I noticed that there is not a monument in Canada dedicated to the Persian Gulf mission. There are monuments dedicated to smaller missions, but 4,000 Canadians went to the Persian Gulf and there's no monument. Give them a monument. I mean, here on the Afghan side, we're hammering for a monument. Give them a monument too. Another thing that I mentioned briefly in my opening statement, I talked about the Combat Action Declaration that is teased every couple of years. We're talking about war service amongst different generations of veterans, and why not just apply that? That would give the recognition to those who crossed the line, went outside the line, and actually engaged the enemy. We've been talking about it for decades. I mean, these are I think Mr. Blois was the one who said it. Commemoration is incredibly easy, and the fact that the government's dragging its feet on it is indicative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bliney, and colleagues. That that we have another panel, but I will allow just one question to each group. A question of 1 minute to close this panel. So I don't know if Mr. Richards would like to take this minute to ask a question. Please go ahead, Mr. Richards.
Thank you. I'll ask each of you. How would it make you feel as a veteran who fought for this country, who was prepared to give your life for this country, to know that during the recent D-Day commemorations in France, that there were no Canadian flags as part of the ceremony? I'll let you start, Mr. Banks.
Oops. I don't know really how to respond to that. I didn't have that answer prepared. Gross, I guess. I mean, again, just to reiterate the last thing I said in my last intervention, commemoration is incredibly easy. Why is the government so bad at it? I mean, we're talking about a delegation and some flags. What would that have cost? $20,000? Come on.
Mr. Bruya?
Thank you for the question. When we join the military, it's not just about that time period that we served. When we belong to a unit, there is a history associated with it. We've heard about the mention of honors. And even if we're not part of another unit, we feel a part of that huge military, I won't say family, but it's a huge military closeness that occurs at a deep community, at a deep emotional level. And so when something historical is not honored, it affects us in the present. That D-Day was part of our history, part of our legacy. Being in the military is, a legacy of people that have sacrificed before us and people that sacrifice after us. And we are deeply attached to us, and it wounds us deeply when it occurs that the proper commemoration is not occurring.
Quickly, Mr. Blois, if you'd like to very quick, please.
To piggyback on Sean's comment there, one of the things that I'm immensely proud of is that for the rest of my regiment's history, there will be Afghanistan on the colors. And I know I contributed, and I know everybody who was with me who contributed to put that on that flag. And it means a great deal to us. But when I look at all of those other battle honors on there, the Pursuit to Mons, Vimy Ridge, the Battle of Ortona, I don't look at that and say that's somebody else. Those are my brothers. Those are my sisters. Those are the people that I fought with. We're the same. If I see a veteran who fought in Korea, we look at each other and we're family and we see each other the same way. So when the government can't do something as simple as recognize the sacrifice that our brothers and our sisters made on that, and maybe one of the most monumental days in the world history, it's a bloody disgrace.
Thank you. Colleagues, you know that I'm trying to keep the chrono, so try to keep it really 1 minute. Mr. Miao, please.
I'll try to keep it very short. Thank you for being here. I'll ask a very general question. Is there a general difference between to the risk and injury assumed by CAF personnel deployed in official wartime service versus special duty service? And a question to all of you. If Mr. Bruyere, you can start first.
Hopefully that you guys can refer to the data that was gratefully supplied by Veterans Affairs that shows the comparison. It's not a one-for-one comparison between wartime service and the special duty areas that we talk about, but we can see the immense cost of serving in so-called peacetime and so-called peacekeeping missions. That cost is, although the deceased in area may not be the same because of changes in warfare, changes in combat medicine that is occurring, being able to evacuate casualties as quickly as possible and save them. But the lifelong casualties, the ones that develop afterwards that aren't officially recognized on cenotaphs, monuments, and books of remembrance, those casualties are comparable in every way with wartime service. Psychological injury, physical injury, these are things that we need to start commemorating and respecting because those people are with us now, right? And they need to know that they're being recognized for what they live every day.
Thank you, sorry, Mr. Miao. So, on va passer à Monsieur Desilets. Donc, essayez de cibler votre témoin pour.
Please try to ask one short question, Mr. Desilets. Mr. Blois, earlier you stated that the government is not respecting its own policies. If you could tell us a bit more, that would be great, because we've seen this with the war, the monument for the mission in Afghanistan.
Thank you for the question. So the time frames that Veterans Affairs sets out is that on the completion of an application, which includes all of the medical documentation that usually is sourced by only the veteran and provided to Veterans Affairs, on the completion of that, which is solely determined by the Veterans Affairs when that's done, then the time frame for that 16 weeks for Veterans Affairs to make a decision on an initial application for benefits. So this is somebody who's putting in their application for the first time saying, I was either injured in the service and it was years ago or whenever, that 16-week time frame. That's what Veterans Affairs tells a veteran, 16 weeks. And we know it's never met. It's very, very rarely met. And veterans wait years. And the problem that veterans run into is you cannot get benefits and treatment for your medical condition you're putting your application in for until that decision has been made by Veterans Affairs.
Thank you very much. And the last question from Ms. Blenny. Please, go ahead. 1 minute, please.
Thank you. And it's for Sean. We've heard testimony that the Pension Act covers economic losses. Do you have any thoughts that you want to share about that?
The government has been pushing that narrative ever since they created the new Veterans Charter in 2006. And I would just bring us back to the words of John Todd, who was the designer of the Pension Act in 1919, who was one of the first 3 pension commissioners. He wrote, "Those who give public service do so not for themselves alone, but for the society of which they are part. Therefore, each citizen should share equally in the suffering which war brings to a nation. War may make citizens suffer in property or in person. compensation for property loss lies outside the province of a war pension. A war pension does not compensate for economic loss through destruction of property or interruption of business. A war pension compensates only for detriment, bodily or mentally, to the persons of those who serve their country in war. I would also add that the small matter of the billion-dollar lawsuit that was based upon deducting Pension Act payments from income through the Manouche case that met the final payments in 2013, where the courts recognized that Pension Act was not for income loss.
Thank you. We're going to stop right here for the first panel. And I'd like to, on behalf of members of the committee and myself, say thank you for your testimony and also thank you for your service and continuing advocacy. Et nous avions avec nous aujourd'hui, à titre personnel, monsieur.
We have with us as an individual the retired captain, Mr. Christopher Banks, and Sean Brea, retired Captain Air Force Intelligence Officer. We had Michael Blois as well, lawyer, veteran. And again, I would like to thank all of the people who participated in this first part of the meeting, and thank you to the students. We are going to suspend a few moments while the next guests get settled. Meetings.
reprenons la séance.
We are resuming the meeting. As you know, we are carrying out a study on recognizing Persian Gulf and wartime service veterans. For the second hour, we have new witnesses with us who are here in the room.
To welcome our witnesses, we have with us for this second hour Honorable Rear Admiral retired Mrs. Rebecca Patterson, Senator, Ontario. Welcome. As individual, we have Colonel retired Mark Gasparotto, Afghanistan Veteran Combat Subunit Commander, and Lieutenant Colonel retired Dean Tremblay, Afghanistan Veteran Combat Subunit Commander. As you know, you're going to have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and after that, we're going to, members of the committee will ask you some questions. So it's my pleasure to ask the Honorable Senator to start for 5 minutes. Mrs. Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, and good afternoon. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Senator Rebecca Patterson. Before taking this role, I served as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces for 34 years, deployed in various theaters of operation, including the Persian Gulf, Somalia, and Afghanistan, and provided operational-level medical planning and support to Canadian Armed Forces personnel deployed across the world. And I'm here as an individual and as a veteran. On the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq in January 1991, armed conflict broke out in the Persian Gulf. Canada committed 1 Canadian field hospital to support the British Army 33rd Field Hospital in support of an anticipated ground war. In less than 24 hours after hostilities broke out, I became a member of 1 Canadian Field Hospital as a critical care nurse, and I, along with about 350 other... other medical personnel of all occupations, signalers, logisticians, and a platoon of the Royal Canadian Regiment Infantry soldiers were brought together at CFB Petawawa, Ontario, to conduct pre-deployment training and to prepare our equipment. The full complement of the field hospital arrived in Saudi Arabia by mid-February 1991. Due to the rapid evolution of the ground war, along with safety concerns of transporting personnel in a war zone, only a complement of the field hospital was deployed to the Ford location with our British counterparts, located approximately 40 kilometers from the Saudi-Kuwait-Iraqi border. Duties for the forward deployed field hospital personnel included surgical and medical treatment of Allied soldiers and wounded Iraqi soldiers. Eventually, our RCR platoon were tasked to help manage the influx of Iraqi detainees. They were also responsible for escorting wounded Iraqis through the treatment process. We returned home in late March 1991. You can accurately say that 1 Canadian field hospital were physically closest to the ground campaign. Since the adoption of the Statute of Westminster in 1931, Canada only formally declared war once, back in 1939, when King, on advice of his Canadian ministers, brought Canada into the Second World War. Therefore, Canadians went to war and were de facto became war veterans. Canada has not formally declared war on another nation since the Charter of the United Nations was signed in 1945. Despite this, Canadian military forces have been engaged in conflict areas around the world, whether they be police actions, peacekeeping, peacemaking, or any other type of intervention on the direction of Canada. As Michael Rossignol aptly noted in a 1992 paper prepared for us here in Parliament, the Canadian Forces Act of 1950 allowed the armed forces to be placed on active service by the Governor and Council, advised by the Minister of National Defence, not only when Canada's security was threatened, but when, and I'm going to underline this, when collective action was taken under the UN Charter or NATO or any other collective defence agency. In fact, placing military on active service is done for bureaucratic reasons and for access to benefits. As noted by the Minister of National Defence in 1950, it relates to application of the insurance principle that has been very well covered by my predecessors. From the Cold War to modern day, placing military forces on active service has been required to ensure they are ready to engage in at a moment's notice anywhere the conflicts arise around the world. And so while the when to place troops on active service effectively changed with the introduction of that act, it unintentionally created a loophole for future veterans to be ineligible for the same benefits as those who served in active service during the Second World War and eventually Korea. The next bureaucratic choice was the requirement to designate a theater of operations as an SDA, as well as consult with the Minister of Veterans Affairs for benefits. And so the Canadians who served in these theaters of operations are not considered war veterans. We must ask ourselves whether the current definitions and criteria for veterans' benefits and commemorative recognition truly recognizes the realities of modern conflict. Canadians have served, been injured, and died on behalf of our country since the Boer War. I ask, is one death or injury worth more or less than another based on time? As yet, you've heard many other fabulous testimonies. We currently have a system with stark differences between how veterans are treated and how they are commemorated, depending on the nature of the conflict they served in and where it took place. I have a number of recommendations, which I will touch to very quickly, and then we'll conclude. The first recommendation is to consider a definition of war as a subcategory consideration under special duty area within applicable acts and regulations. You've heard about the Pension Act in a disequilibrium. VAC should conduct a study, including the use of a Veterans Roundtable to modernize and harmonize these two acts. And the inequities, we know, go beyond just the veteran themselves. We've heard this committee come forward in 2023 with a push to repeal the Gold Diggers Act or Marriage After 60. This must continue because modern veterans live beyond the age of 60 years and they're independent adults. And finally, our families also serve. I would also like to recommend that we consider them an extension of service and call for the implementation of the 2021 Office of the Veteran Ombudsman's recommendation that mental health treatment benefits be available to family members in their own right for conditions related to their allied military service. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And now let's go to Colonel Gasparotto for 5 minutes, please. Colonel.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to present my insights on training and ultimately commanding Canadian Armed Forces personnel in combat. I've been asked to present these insights to provide the realities of military service with a particular focus on duty, unlimited liability, fighting spirit, and discipline. The CAF's primary mission is to detect, deter, and defend against threats to or attacks on Canada. As such, military personnel are unique as citizens. Once we voluntarily enroll, we are the only ones who've been sanctioned to manage violence on behalf of the state, to use force or the threat thereof in pursuit of national interests and political objectives. Having pulled the trigger and taking several enemy lives, this is not an abstract concept for me. To achieve the CAF's unique mission within Canadian society, there are certain professional expectations. I want to provide my interpretations on 4 that are most relevant to this testimony. Duty. The mission comes first, always. Service to Canada before self means that when we enroll, we subordinate ourselves to the team, the unit, and the greater good. That means sacrifice, a price paid for by our members willingly, and their families sometimes unwillingly. Unlimited liability means the legal requirement for CAF members to accept that in the process of their duties, they may have to risk their lives or the lives of those they lead. I've buried a soldier and continue to know more that struggle with physical injuries and mental health conditions. So many of us are still living this sacrifice. Fighting spirit. We must have a warrior culture and ethos. We must be able to operate across all planes, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, to close with and destroy the enemy. To quote General Rick Hillier, we're not the public service of Canada. We're not just another department or the Canadian Forces, and our job is to be able to kill people. We manage violence on all of your behalfs. Discipline and the rule of law, following lawful orders from the chain of command, orders that may put our lives at risk or may require us to injure or kill enemy combatants. Therefore, our great leadership challenge is to prepare ourselves and our people to engage in the grim matters of warfare without losing our humanity. Now, an example from combat operations in Kandahar, a so-called special duty area. In the summer of 2006, the Taliban attempted to seize Kandahar city with many hundreds of heavily armed soldiers. That threat led to Operation Medusa, Canada's largest combat operation since the Korean War, and at the time, NATO's largest combat operation in its history. While we were equipped with exceptional armored fighting vehicles, we did not have any breaching assets to defeat the extensive Taliban defenses. So we rented yellow civilian bulldozers. Now, my operators thought this was a crazy plan and expressed their concerns based on the obvious significant risks. We mitigated the risks as best we could. And regardless of the residual dangers, they were ordered to breach the Taliban defenses. They had no choice in the matter. In the end, we were successful. However, one member of my squadron was blown up 3 times while operating heavy equipment outside the wire, earning him 2 sacrifice medals for his injuries. His name is Lance Hooper, now a warrant officer, and to me, he's the embodiment of duty and the embracing of unlimited liability. Lance is the embodiment of how discipline is the foundation of fighting spirit. In conclusion, enrollment in the CAF is voluntary. Once enrolled, CAF members must serve until released in accordance with the regulations. Once enrolled, CAF members have numerous obligations of service which do not have civilian equivalents. Once enrolled, CAF members have an obligation to respect, uphold, and obey the chain of command. Training and socialization during times of service are designed to cultivate a habit of obedience and respect for authority essential for conducting effective and efficient military operations during active service. Combat operations in Kandahar, Afghanistan cost the lives of many CAF personnel and the application of significant violence against a determined enemy. Calling it a special duty area rings hollow when judged with the realities on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gasparotto. And now let's go to Lieutenant Retired Dean Tremblay for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you as a witness to share my experiences as a tactical combat team commander in Afghanistan from September 2008 to April 2009. Operating from Forward Operating Base Frontenac, which is located slightly north of Kandahar City, my core team was based on an armored reconnaissance squadron with attachments from the infantry, combat engineers, artillery, and other specialists. Our initial core strength was 145 personnel. I emphasize the word initial because sadly 4 of my soldiers were killed in action doing what Canada asked them to do. It was on this occasion that I deployed with these amazing Canadians outside the wire on a daily basis to conduct combat operations. I would like to quickly highlight 2 critical takeaways from my experience in Afghanistan that I believe are very relevant to the discussion of active service of Canadian Forces members. First, leadership in combat. During my career, I deployed in several missions, each with its own inherent challenges and dangers. For me, being a combat commander in Afghanistan, with all its complexities and the responsibility for making daily life and death decisions, often void of all information, was the most powerful, professional, and emotional experience of my life. We were at war. We were engaged in daily operations against a determined and armed enemy. Every day we were at risk of being targeted, wounded, or killed, but we too were expected to do the same to our enemy if legally called upon. My decisions, the way I led and employed my team to achieve our mission, and ultimately the orders I issued to my soldiers would have an impact, an immediate impact, as well as a lifelong impact on every single one of them. In the performance of our mission, we suffered significant casualties. My core team suffered 26% casualties due to enemy action. This included 4 killed, 34 seriously injured. Of those, 22 critically wounded were repatriated back to Canada. These figures do not begin to reflect those who continue to suffer with seen and unseen injuries many years after our deployment. To put this into an operational perspective, at Staff College, where military officers are trained in operational planning, we use wartime figures that suggest that after a unit has suffered 10 to 15% casualties, they were deemed combat ineffective and subsequently removed from the front line for reconstitution. In Afghanistan, however, there was no front line. The enemy was all around us. Reconstitution never fully occurred despite our casualties. I share these statistics not as a scorecard or to glorify casualties, but to highlight the immediate and long-term human impact of war on our people. We as leaders have a very direct and significant responsibility to our personnel as we make life-altering decisions in these unpredictable, dangerous war zones. Leadership is not only about achieving operational or tactical success. It's about having compassion and enduring commitment to those we are responsible for and accountable to while in the fight, but also long after. In fact, the health and wellness of our personnel is 100% part of mission success. Unlimited liability. Throughout my years of service to Canada, I proudly accepted unlimited liability, meaning I could be lawfully ordered into harm's way under conditions that might lead to loss of life. As regular force members on active service, we never questioned this expectation. When deploying in operations in support of Government of Canada commitments, regardless of the threat environment, unlimited liability remained a constant. We had an obligation to obey lawful orders, but this did not prevent us from asking constructive questions to clarify intent, plan and prepare our teams, or institute important mitigation strategies to de-risk the mission and protect our personnel's health and well-being. Despite all of this, sadly, bad things can still happen. During my time in Afghanistan, I did receive lawful orders directing my unit to conduct combat missions that put myself and my soldiers at risk, and some missions sadly resulted in death. Despite these terrible moments, we continued to conduct operations and perform our duty. We did not close shop to escape the dangers that we were faced on a daily basis. These difficult times reinforce the importance of trust within our ranks. We had to trust the person to the left and to the right, the chain of command, and by extension, our country and its national institutions to respect, honor, and care for our personnel and their families consistently and meaningfully, long after the deployment concluded. The experiences of war are not framed by a start and end date. They are enduring for all members and by extension, their families. In closing, I went through long personal periods of doubt, guilt, and significant internal reflection to manage my expectations, my experiences and decisions, to rationalize the long-term impact of our Afghanistan combat mission on my soldiers and my role, good or bad, in their lives, their reintegration post-deployment, and even their pain. Despite this, I never questioned my role as a leader and the necessity to make difficult decisions, nor did I ever question the necessity of unlimited liability because of operational imperatives, legal obligations, and moral expectations. I am grateful that this committee is focused on this important topic, and thank you for your support to our veterans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tremblay. Now we're going to start the first round of questions of 6 minutes, and I invite colleagues, you can split your 6 minutes because of the time, and I invite Mr. Terry Doddell to start, Mrs. Kathy Wogenthal to start the round of questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all. Your testimony is overpowering, honestly, to me. I'm going to ask, first of all, the gentleman, I am hearing the term war used often, and yet it doesn't exist anymore, according to legislation, is my understanding. And yet, what you just described to me as a civilian, absolutely, I would put it in that category, and I sense you as well would put it in that category. So what about these responsibilities of duty, unlimited liability, being required as volunteers to obey the chain of command, all of these things, how is that, is it defined somehow differently for the circumstances you found yourself in Afghanistan versus previous war scenarios?
If I may start, I want to highlight I think Mark alluded to the term volunteerism. I think once you sign up for active service, the volunteerism ends, right? So you have that commitment, you have the obligation to operate within the constraints. And one thing that came to mind as you asked that question, I wanted to highlight three published ethical obligations that we as Canadian Forces members have when you're in service to the country and certainly deployed on operations. One is respect the dignity of all persons. Pretty straightforward, I believe. Service Canada before self, and Mark rightly highlighted that, and obey and support lawful authority. And that's the manner in which you operate at all times, be it domestically or abroad on operations in service to your country. So when you look at those three published and accepted ethical principles, it's quite clear the way that all of our personnel will operate, and willingly and knowingly that they've made that commitment to each other, but also Canadians and the Government of Canada.
I'll maybe broaden it out from there. I appreciate what I heard was the repercussions of.
Je m'excuse, Monsieur le Président.
Excusez-moi, j'ai...
Point of order.
On n'a pas de traduction.
No translation.
Merci. Écoutez, je vais m'assurer.
So I wanted to move forward with another question. Can you is there translation now?
Just a second, please. I'd like... if I'm speaking in English, and do you have any no translation yet? So, et par contre, lorsque je parle en français,
But when I speak French, is everyone hearing English interpretation? Yes?
donc, well, the problem is from English to French, and well, they even know what's up. Oui. Monsieur Desilets, est-ce que vous êtes sur le bon channel?
Mr. Desilets, are you using the right channel?
Oui. D'accord. Merci. Et voilà, donc.
Tout à fait.
Tout à fait, c'est réglé. Merci. Excellent. Donc, Mrs. Wagenthal, clock was stopped, so don't worry. You have more than 4 minutes to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so I believe the direction I was going is that you talked about the wounded, those who died in their service, and those critically wounded and others, and then shared with us the fact that health and wellness is impacted truly for the rest of your life. I have a question I want to ask that is a little sensitive, and if you don't want to answer it, that's fine. We're in a situation right now where over time the use of MAID has become more of an awareness within the armed forces. We have heard of them being offered, soldiers being offered that, with even a clarification that not to worry that your families would be taken care of. We've had many take their own lives after coming home, and of course, those circumstances would not have been seen in the same light, apparently. I just need to ask the question, what does that bring to your heart and mind in regard to serving your country and coming home and having that as something that's brought forward?
Okay. I think when folks deploy to serve their country, they deploy with the belief that they're going to do their job, do what's asked of them, with the mindset that's their duty, their commitment to Canada, their pride in the country, their pride of everything that's related to that. I don't believe that they deploy to think about the what ifs of if things go south and they go terribly wrong. I think they deploy with the trust that their colleagues, their leadership, their chain of command, and certainly the institution and the government and the country that we represent are supporting us in what we do. Otherwise, why would we be sent to these different parts of the world? With the mindset that if something does go bad on those most terrible days that are unimaginable, that they will be taken care of. So there's that institutional trust that I think that while we are socialized, if you want to use that term, upon joining the military, that you will operate in a certain fashion with these ethical principles and moral obligations, you also have trust in the institution, which extends far beyond the unit you're deploying with. So I believe that they have that trust that's in place should those bad moments occur. And I think what we're seeing in some of the testimony today, that maybe that trust has been questioned. But certainly when you deploy, you know that where you're going generally, and you have that obligation. Yeah.
So we've heard a lot at this committee about the challenges of seeing discrepancies between what was in the previous act and the one that our veterans are under now. Can you give your perspectives on that as to what has happened in that regard and whether you see it as better, worse, or perhaps Mark and then if Senator Patterson?
So I can only speak for myself and anecdotally, based on conversations I have with former squadron or other people I've served with. Certainly when I needed help, the help was there through Veterans Affairs. Now, I didn't have a complex case, but I have no complaints of the service that I received. None whatsoever. I thought it was quite seamless. And I think you probably hear all of the bad stories that come, and I think that paints, unfortunately, a victim narrative, and that all soldiers are broken, and that is not the case. That is not the case by far. And while there are still things that need to be fixed, and I can't speak to exactly what those are, I do know that there has been a real attempt within the armed forces, certainly, and what I've seen from Veterans Affairs, there's been a real attempt to address some of those things, understanding that there's probably still a ways to go. In terms of the discrepancies between these various policies, I have not lived the impact of those, and so perhaps Senator Patterson could fill in the blank there, or the gap.
Oh, that is why you have a recommendation coming. So it shouldn't matter if you served in 2005 and have one access to benefits, or 2007 when we brought in the new charter. And when you'll see one of my recommendations, it needs to be a harmonization in collaboration with the Veterans Roundtable to have a look and see what those actually mean.
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now I invite Miss Lisa Hefner for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And just taking a moment to thank all of you for being here with us today, and also for your service to Canada. You and the other veterans I see in the room behind here to support. Senator Patterson, we were speaking earlier in the room. We've been talking a lot at this committee about commemoration and battle honors, which we know are very important to veterans, almost equally important to the compensation that they receive. And on Monday, I understand you were at a ceremony with my colleague from Kingston and the Islands to present a medal to a retired Captain Sean Casey, not the same Sean Casey that we have here at the table with me today. But I understand there were some takeaways from that event, and I am hoping you can describe those for us, please.
Thank you for the question. So what has happened, it was a very interesting time in history. When we went to the Gulf War, it's the end of the Cold War. We're starting to, I'm going to say, digitize in the most basic ways in the military, and record systems changed. So when personnel tasked to go to the Persian Gulf crisis move forward, the administrative system didn't catch up. So for someone like Sean Casey, or even myself, as it turns out, I didn't realize that, when you look at a record, so as you're looking at what's to be commemorated and how, it's based on the record that's inputted by somebody. So in Sean Casey's case, it was just completely missed that he actually was on board ship on the Terra Nova, and he was in the Persian Gulf. And so for him to have to fight and say, no, I was there. And remember, not everybody had a cell phone that they could take a photo and date and timestamp. It was us with our little cameras and hoping the photo went well. So he was missed and fought for many years to try and say, no, I was there. But it becomes very hard to prove when you're working off of a paper copy with people who move around all the time and someone loses your documents somewhere, transferring over to a digital copy. And for myself, they said I didn't actually serve in Saudi Arabia, but they'd give me credit. And I learned this as I was retiring 33 years later. And but why does it matter? Because it affects how they do calculations of everything from severance pay to your, your benefits to what if I got injured when it says. So I'll give you an example on my record. It said I was in Germany. And so I got an out of country credit, woohoo! But what I didn't get was a special duty area one. So you're going to find that especially more junior members did not know how to navigate this system. It makes it really impossible for VAC to truly calculate and for DND to figure out, did you actually serve in the Gulf? So I think one of the things that can come out of that is that there needs to be, when you have people in that sort of 90s, early 90s transition period, that special consideration is given to screening through their files so we don't end up with 33 years later Sean Casey being awarded his golf medal.
Early 90s really doesn't seem all that long ago to me, but the technology was dramatically different. So I appreciate you bringing that perspective. And sticking with you, I understand that you are participating in our Women's Veterans Council Assessment Board. As far as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is a new board, first of its kind, just getting underway this month. Tell us more about your participation and what you're hoping comes out of that whole process.
Thank you very much for the question. So what we do know is the modern veteran from really, when did I join? 1989 onward, looks different. We're representing a more diverse Canada as we move forward. So as the number of women and all their intersections of identity, more and more of us have come to serve, we look at benefits and programs, not just in the Canadian Armed Forces, but within the veterans community that actually don't fit. And what about exposure? I know we've had some challenges from people in the Persian Gulf with reproductive challenges. The occupational health aspects for women are not the same. Unisex fits nobody, and the same with this. So the Women's Council is actually intended for both the RCMP and for veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces to actually advise the minister on how to move forward. How do we better support women in all our intersections in terms of addressing benefits and whatever the issues may be. So I think it's quite an important thing to do. There's both myself and Senator Bev Bussin, who is an RCMP veteran, and along with about 5 other people, is we have gone through essentially a blind assessment process to try and create a roster of people who can well advise the minister moving forward on women's issues.
And would you specifically be advising the Veterans Minister, or are there other, like I think of I'm the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth, and I think there's a lot of parallels there too, so I hope you have that communication with other ministers as well.
So because being a sitting senator and chair of our Veterans Committee, I have to make sure I do not cross lines. I'm very thoughtful about conflict of interest. But if I was to talk abstractly in this, I would suggest that having that discussion with the Minister of Veterans Affairs would be of value. I will go back to my time as a serving member in the Canadian Armed Forces and champion for women. I was in front of all committees minus veterans. So I think it's a good point you have.
And would just quickly, do you expect that the board can help us even further improve military culture so that it's even more welcoming to women and gender diverse people?
And again, it'll be up to Minister of Veterans Affairs and how she shares her counsel with the Minister of National Defence. But you have women with a broad, like I said, intersection of identity, but broad experience levels that could probably help the RCMP too. So it's certainly, sure.
Merci beaucoup. Et maintenant.
Thank you very much. For the next 6 minutes, we have Mr. Luc Desilets, who will not have to share his time. Mr. Desilets, the 6 minutes are all yours. I would love to be able to share my time, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would like to start by tabling a motion. I should be able to dispense with it quickly. I will read the motion, and my colleagues from the other parties have been made aware of it. In a brief preamble, I found it difficult to have 6 witnesses today for 2 hours, and perhaps a little less. There was a lot of material. We would have wanted to ask many more questions, and so that's why we'll be tabling the following motion, that the committee hold 2 additional meetings on its study on recognizing Gulf War veterans and on the definition of war and wartime service, special service, and the distinction between all of these. We could examine the benefits for veterans that we hear from. Well, there are 2 witnesses that we would like to hear from. And if we have 4 hours, of course, the other parties could add witnesses. So that we hear from Sin Boya. We heard from him earlier, but we would have had other questions. Louise Richard for 1 hour. Each of those witnesses would have 1 hour. And I would add to this, with the previous motion that I tabled, that there be an additional 1 hour meeting with the Defense Minister. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Regarding the Minister, yes, we did have a motion that had been tabled. The clerk and I will continue to work hard to organize a 1 hour meeting. But for that second part of the meeting, I'm not sure if colleagues would wish to have translation of the motion, or are you ready to adopt the motion? What would you like to do, Mr. Casey?
Yeah.
Oui, on va appuyer.
We will support the motion. I have nothing to add to it. Thank you.
Blake Richards would like to say something. Mr. Richards, please.
Sure. I guess let me start with a question. I don't want to yield the floor, but I would like an answer to the question. If there's a desire to have more meetings, that's one thing. It's another when we start to get into, let's give this witness 1 hour and this witness an hour. And I guess my question would be, like we had some good witnesses today, and one of them wasn't listed in the in this motion as wanting to have them brought back. Is there an opportunity for others to be brought back in that scenario? Then there might be other witnesses we'd like to bring back. Is there an ability to add new witnesses? I mean, when we submitted our witnesses, we submitted them on the basis of understanding the length of the study, and now the study's been if it's going to be extended, I would seek the opportunity to be provided the opportunity to add new witnesses if that's the case. Can we get some kind of an indication, what the status of our witness list is, and would we be given an opportunity to add additional witnesses to the list as well? Can maybe the chair or the clerk give us an indication? And I don't want to yield the floor because I do have other comments. But
okay, thank you very much. I know that the honorable senator, she's aware of the procedures, but just telling you that we have to discuss that motion and we'll come back to you. So, Monsieur Desilets, est-ce que vous pouvez...
Je pensais que ça...
I thought it was going to be very quick. So I would ask to amend my motion and to remove the aspect that identifies witnesses. We could leave that with the clerk. And the clerk can choose 4 witnesses. Thank you. Thank you. So if I understood correctly, we will organize 2 additional meetings with 4 witnesses on this study. Of course, we will also be working to hear from the minister. Mr. Richards.
I can still get a response to the question, Chair. If we're going to add additional meetings, will it be what is the status of our witness list? Is how many witnesses have not been invited at this point, and is there an opportunity for us to suggest additional witnesses?
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Richards, like your intervention in the previous panel, because our clerk, our original clerk, she's not here today, so I can tell you exactly, and the analyst also, how many witnesses that we have left. But you can leave it on the committee to look at and try to invite them and to appear. Or we can also ask some of the previous witnesses to send to us a brief or something that we can add, like Mr. Brouillet, by example. So he was there this morning. So, well, I understand that you all agreed to have two more meetings. No, not really. Please, Mr.
Chair,
Richards.
I guess what I'm trying to determine is the need for the additional meetings. If we have no additional witnesses, and I guess that's what I'm getting at here. I'm trying to understand what if we have witnesses that have not yet been invited, which we don't have the answer to, and I'm not clear on whether there's no indication been given whether we couldn't offer to the clerk and the chair additional witnesses. It's hard for me to support a motion without knowing whether there's a need. Certainly there's no doubt there would be others we could hear from, but if we don't have witnesses on our list and we're not accepting additional witnesses, it seems a bit odd.
Well, for sure, I can, as chair, accept other witnesses, but I know that next week is going to be a break week, but I have to give instruction to the clerk also. So, and we have witnesses with us in front of us, so members of the committee, we have to decide.
Chair?
Yes,
Sure.
Mrs.
Sorry, I still had the floor, Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Richards.
I think perhaps this seems as though it might be a discussion that we need to have in a committee business, and we can allow the witnesses. I mean, we have very little time left, and it seems like there's some confusion here as to what will occur and what won't. So I would suggest that we set this aside, table it for committee business. So I would suggest we do that, Chair.
Thank you so much. And now let's go to Miss Blaney. Do you have the floor?
Could I just call the vote? I think that the committee can make a decision. Most people want to make a decision, and I think we should just vote on it.
Well, so before we go to vote, Mr. Desilets would like to say something.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, we're asking for 2 additional meetings, 4 hours. I would remove the last element on witnesses. I think that we could re-invite witnesses, but I will send my choices to the clerk. But there are other witnesses that we would like to hear from. For example, Mr. Roof, who is a Conservative MP. I completely agree that we vote on this. I apologize. I thought that it would be solved really quickly in 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Before we talk about witnesses on the list, we should adopt the motion. Mr. Richards?
Floor is yours.
Yes, Chair. I would just make a quick amendment to the, hopefully it can be adopted quickly as well. I mean, I want to get back to the witnesses as well, but if we're going to have additional meetings, I know that the Minister of Defense has been invited, but I would amend the motion by adding that we invite the Minister of Veterans Affairs to appear as one of the witnesses for this study as well.
OK, d'accord. Comme M. Desilets le dit, bon...
As Mr. Desilets said, That was in the intention of the motion, and so I believe that we can now vote. But with Mr. Richards' comments,
We can say there is an unanimous decision to go with that motion. Is that okay? Is it unanimous?
Sorry, Chair.
We agreed.
Suggested an amendment to add the Minister of Veterans Affairs as a witness. Are we voting on that first?
Okay. First, on the amendment, are there any objection to adopt the amendment presented by Mr. Richards? No. So now, how about the motion adopted? Amended. Sorry. Are there any objection to adopt that motion adopted? No. Yeah.
Object to adding the
No.
minister.
Okay. So for the motion amended, I'm going to ask, please, the clerk to take the vote to make sure that we are on the same page. So we're going to take the vote on the motion amended as amended, right? Yeah.
Are we not going to vote on the amendment?
I thought that we just did. I think if there is no objection.
There wasn't.
Point of order.
Yeah.
Point of order, Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Richards.
Yeah, you had clearly indicated that you were asking whether there is any objection, which means you were seeking unanimous consent. You indicated that you had received that unanimous consent. I believe that we have, in fact, passed the amendment.
Yeah.
No, I object.
Yeah, well, listen,
Immediately.
I understand that too, Mr. Richards, but I have a lot of colleagues saying that it was not their understanding. So I think that I have to find a way to permit to all of you guys to intervene. So, well, I think that we can go to vote on the amendment and after that go to the motions. Yeah. Excuse me.
Regardez, c'est ce que je disais au greffier lors.
that's what I was saying to the clerk. When I read it out, in the last sentence, I stated, I'm not sure how I worded it exactly, but I stated 1 hour with the minister. That is in the motion, so we don't need an amendment. And we had a motion on this 2 weeks ago. Monsieur Desilets, I think you had added the Minister of Defense, not the Minister of Veterans Affairs. And that's what Mr. Richards is trying to add.
Alors, voilà. Donc, alors, listen, il y a un amendement.
There's an amendment on the floor tabled by Mr. Richards, who would like to invite the Minister of Veterans Affairs. And so I will ask the clerk to move to a vote on the amendment.
S'il vous plaît.
All right, so this is the vote on the amendment regarding the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Casey. Ms. Hepner. Mr. May.
No.
Mr. Miao.
No.
Mr. Sarai.
No.
Mr. Richards.
Yes.
Mr. Dowdle.
In favor.
Mr. Davidson.
Yes.
Ms. Wagenthal.
Yes, and this is in public. I would like to hear the conversation. I'm sure we passed this unanimously, and the chair had indicated so.
Monsieur Desilets.
Pour.
Ms. Blaney.
Yes.
Merci, Monsieur le greffier. Donc,
Thank you, clerk. And so the amendment is adopted. Let us now move to the motion moved by Mr. Desilets as amended. We are going to vote on the amended motion Clerk, please move to the vote.
So the vote is on the motion as amended. Mr. Casey. In favor? Ms. Hepner.
In favor, although I don't think we have the actual text.
Mr. May.
Yes.
Mr. Miao. Mr. Sarai.
Yes.
Mr. Richards.
Yes.
Mr. Dowdle.
In favor.
Mr. Davidson.
Yes.
Ms. Wagenthal.
In favor.
Monsieur Desilets.
Oui.
Ms. Blaney.
Yes.
Ok, parfait. Donc la motion
The motion as amended is adopted. We are going to move forward.
and also the witnesses, maybe that they have other engagements. So I'd like to know if we can do 8 or 10 minutes to conclude this panel. Do you have an objection? No objection? Okay. So if I don't have any objection, we have, and witnesses, it's okay for you too. So I'm going to give 5 minutes to Mr. Desilets and 5 minutes to Ms. Blaney, and we're going to conclude that panel. Please, Monsieur Desilets, à vous la parole.
Again, apologies that it took that much time. Ms. Patterson, do you believe that we need to declare war against another country for it to be considered a war?
Thank you very much. I think that's a very pertinent question. So in preparation to come here, I did a little bit of research, and I'm going to go back to one of the previous questions. We have the legislative look at it, which is the declaration of war under the rules of international armed conflict, of the law of international armed conflict. It certainly talks about a beginning and an end, but it's a legal entity. When you start breaking it down into the administrative, effectively administrative processes that fall under National Defense Act or the Veterans Charter, et cetera, this is where it becomes a noun. And bear with me here. So I thought, what is war? And there is nothing that we have heard from any of your witnesses that do not tell you that you bleed red no matter what legislation calls it. And I know that sounds pretty harsh, but injury and death and impact on families and members, it doesn't matter what we legally call it. So therefore, I thought I'd give you a couple of interesting points. So in the Oxford Dictionary, war as a noun is a conflict carried out by force of arms as between nations and between parties against each other. Basically, the Gulf, Afghanistan, Kosovo. You see how I'm going here? What I also thought was interesting, because we know from 1945 on, when Canada then looked at the UN Charter and it became police action and other names, we understand that it was to walk away from global conflict as we had known it. But did you know, under the UN Charter, they actually define war not as a declaration, but as an action. So interestingly, they define war as any conflict that meets the criteria of armed conflict, according to the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols. As a health services person, I wore a red cross, and the reason why we had, even in the Persian conflict, was those Royal Canadian Regiment soldiers provided force protection for us because I was only to raise my arm in defense as opposed to any other reason. They talk about additional protocols. An armed conflict exists when there is a resort to armed force between states, international armed conflict, or protracted violence between government authorities and organized armed groups within a state. Non-international armed conflict. And why does this matter? Because it talks about the actions that take place. So if we were to take the legislative and apply it to those of us who have served, you can be a war veteran if administratively we write the definition of war in there, that when they look at special duty area, and again, I'm not an expert in this, we need very clever people who write regulations and policies that fall out of it along with Veterans Act, that when you look at a special duty area, and there's all sorts of other things that come with it, why can you not have, if I use all of the examples provided by my colleagues here and in many places that we've been, is that it gets a war designation. It's up to from a benefits perspective, we can do it one way, but from a commemoration perspective, a war veteran, we are asking to be recognized for the ultimate sacrifice to our country. And why are we in dispute? Because it's very hard to define the family that we create, the environments that we go in, down to a bureaucratic process. It's about recognition, it's about dignity, and it's about justice. So there is a potential, and I think it's worth looking into, is bringing the noun war into the regulation to policy level and making an assessment and see if that works. So take it out of legislation and put it into a lower level. Merci.
Vous avez bien fait vos devoirs.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. You did your homework and it was great. I definitely appreciate the idea of an armed conflict. We understand now that we should modify legislation so that we can have equity. How would the Senate react if we were to send an amended legislation to it?
So, oui, non, c'est une bonne question. Where I would have to recuse myself from voting because, of course, I would benefit from any of this. So I want to put that on the table right away. But like there is here in the House of Commons, when it comes to the people who are veterans and serving members of the Canadian Armed Forces and RCMP, you care. We know that. And I actually think it would be received well. The question is it a government bill? Or is it a private member's bill? Where is it going to come at us? So again, these are, as we've just been through, these are the processes of Parliament that matter as well. But on a reception perspective, I think there would be good reception. And again, this is about recognition, commemoration, dignity and respect, and then the insurance principles you talked about later can be dealt with.
Merci, Madame Patterson.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
To Miss Rachel Bellini for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here and, of course, for your service to our country. I'm sorry that you don't get a little bit more time to share your stories, but welcome to Parliament, and here we are. So I'm going to come to the Senator first. I really appreciated your recommendation around having the committee study the equivalency between the two acts. The part that I found particularly intriguing is that the veterans should be invited to a roundtable to inform on this study. And I think one of the challenges that we hear from veterans again and again is they often don't know what they can apply for and they don't understand the changes. And so I'm just wondering, do you think it would be appropriate for VAC to actually do some of that work and sit down with veterans and go through this process of understanding the different benefits and getting feedback from people from the wars that you're talking about that are really left out and really not acknowledged in the way that they need to be?
Thank you for the question. So I want you to know that there have been at least 35 SDAs since World War II, 2 wars with Korea, designated wars. So I think there are many living veterans. So as we always say, nothing about us without us. And we sit at this lofty level of Canada making policy, but we don't always know the lived experience. So if I go back to the concept of having the Women Veterans Council to advise the minister, I actually think it is a very good idea. A veterans advisory council on benefits, harmonizations, a special group. I think it would be of great value because, as we've heard, there are mixed experiences with Veterans Affairs, but also good Veterans Affairs experiences. And I believe they're willing to listen. So I like your recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I understand that you have quite a bit of experience with addressing the Gulf War illness. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that work you've done looks like and sort of what happened, because what we've heard from testimony as well is that that is not acknowledged. The Gulf War illness is not acknowledged, and there's a desire for that to be understood by Canadians a lot more. So I think your work would really help the committee understand maybe next steps and recommendations we should make in that context.
Thank you for the question. So as I said, I was a nursing officer, and when I came back, I ended up as the senior head nurse on the floor that actually ran the Gulf War Clinic for the Canadian Armed Forces. And Colonel retired Ken Scott was the internal medicine specialist who did the assessments. And this was driven by the fact that other allied nations were saying, we're getting a funny constellation of symptoms that are coming together, and we want to know what they're linked to. So on my floor, people would come in from all across the country, because it's when we still had military hospitals, and they would go through a full battery of tests just to make sure it was not some underlying condition. And again, it was, as you know, it's been a disputed syndrome. What is it? How does it work? Now, one of the challenges is we don't invest in research. I'm going to go back to that again. If you want the Canadian solution, it's easy to say no. We need the data, do the research. So moving forward, there are other countries that have done a wealth of investigation. They've looked at things. Is it a form of post-traumatic stress syndrome? Right? Is it there? No, but there's still these outlying things. They've done more work, but if we as Canada want to get on it, you need to put some investment into proper research on this, because it will become hidden. The challenges in a country like Canada that continues to drive forward, we say fire and forget. Right? It's over. Moving on. Next issue, next war. So if you want to look back at it retrospectively, invest in research that is sex and gender-based, disaggregated, in order to see what is the delta, because this is an occupational health issue.
Thank you. And so in that context, I'm going to stop asking questions, and I'm going to move that the testimony of retired Lieutenant Navy Louise Richard from March 19th, 2013 at ACVA be adopted into the study on wartime service veterans. And just to give context, she specifically talks about the Gulf War illness. So I just want to make sure that we have that testimony on record if we need to access it during the report. Hopefully we can just move to a vote.
On va passer au vote. Okay, well, Ms. Blaney, we don't really have too much time, but I can ask members quickly what is their thought on that. Yeah.
We're fine with it on this side.
Well, okay. It's just to add that to the report.
Just so we have access to that testimony. And of course, my team sent it out to everyone, and we were given ample opportunity to review it. And the context, of course, is specifically with the Gulf War illness. She spoke about it in that testimony. So if we can't get her in front of the committee, it would be good to have access to it.
Yeah. How about?
So we're being forced to vote?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Are you agree on that? Or yes? No. OK. How about Monsieur Desilets? Vous êtes prêt à répondre à cette demande?
Are you ready to respond? Or do you have a comment? I'm not sure I understand. I don't understand the necessity of voting on this.
I have to say that even though to you and Ms. Blaney, you know, I know that you're allowed to present motions like that, but the colleague did not even have a copy in the
No,
email.
they have a copy. Yes, they do. I emailed it out about 3 weeks ago. I sent it to every single member. I've had conversations with every party. I know there was some concern of context from the Conservatives, which is why I've given the context. Is she testified specifically about Gulf War syndrome? We know we have a limited amount of time. It's just testimony from 2013, and it's just allowing us to be able to access it. So hopefully we can just call the vote to move forward. This is something that everybody had access to.
Yes, I understand that, Miss Blaney, but I'm in a situation that, first of all, the interpreters that we have the time until 1:20 or 20 minutes because we go longer, and I ask for unanimous
Great.
consent
So
to
can I
do
just
for.
call the vote?
But no, because it's gonna take some times, and we have witnesses. So I will suggest you, if you can
You said
present
I had
it
5 minutes.
the
Chair.
next
You
minute.
said I had
Yes.
5 minutes.
Yes.
I took my 5 minutes and then I moved the motion. So I think if we just vote, we'll get in under the 120.
Yeah, but like I said, I think that there is some discussions that members of the committee has to have, you know. So, entre collègues, je pense que c'est quelque chose qui est faisable.
Between colleagues, I think it's doable.
I would prefer because it's I have a technical teams
The vote
and I
takes less
have
than 5 minutes.
yes, but colleagues, I'm so sorry. It's time to close that meeting because we are the technical staff and well. And
Really
interpreters, I'm so sorry.
If people can't answer, that's
But
ridiculous. It's one veteran's testimony.
sorry, I'm so sorry, but I have to say to our witnesses, first of all, thank you for coming testify, even though that you are there as individual, but all of your comments, I think it really matters to all veterans. So let me say merci beaucoup à
Thank you to the Honorable Rear Admiral Retired Rebecca Patterson, Senator Ontario, and as an individual, Colonel Retired Mark Gasparotto, Afghanistan Veteran Combat Subunit Commander, and Lieutenant Colonel Retired Dean Tremblay, Afghanistan Veteran Combat Subunit Commander. On that, colleagues,
by next Tuesday at 12. Meeting adjourned.